Good morning. My name is Lucia Hu, and I am the Multicultural Ambassador and also the Multicultural Community Engagement Committee Leadership Program for the Mental Health Foundation Australia. We begin today's proceedings by acknowledging the traditional and original owners of the land, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also extend this same respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here with us today. On behalf of the Mental Health Foundation Australia and our chairperson, Mr. Vassan Srinivasan, I would also like to welcome and thank each and every one of you for attending our Construction and Mental Health Forum. The National Mental Health Month is an initiative of the Mental Health Foundation Australia to advocate for and raise awareness of Australian mental health as a community. The Mental Health Foundation Australia's National Mental Health Month is unlike many other mental health awareness campaigns. It aims to bring all Australians together in a nationwide conversation about mental health, and we aim to maintain this conversation for an entire month and beyond. Through a series of various mental health related events, National Mental Health Month is a program that the Mental Health Foundation Australia is extremely proud of, and we intend to reach out to and educate as many Australians as possible to help reduce stigma and facilitate positive and non-judgmental discussion surrounding the important topic of mental health in Australia. With 1 in 5 Australians experiencing a mental health illness, it is time we give mental health its due attention. And that is exactly what the Mental Health Foundation Australia is wanting to achieve. Throughout this month, many events have been organised in each state and territory in Australia, aiming to attract and unite Australians of all ages and backgrounds to raise an awareness of the need for better mental health for all. This year, the theme of National Mental Health Month is Post-Pandemic Recovery Challenges and Resilience. This year's theme will focus on raising awareness about mental health in various industries and communities. Every individual has faced, and many are still facing, unprecedented challenges due to the COVID pandemic. This year, the theme for mental health is the post-pandemic recovery challenges and resilience. With this theme in mind, we aim to extend our campaign even wider than previous years, with events planned to embrace many different community groups and people of all ages on the road to recovery and fostering resilience, as we all hashtag resilience and recovery. Please join us in celebrating the Mental Health Foundation Australia by viewing this short video.
Hi everyone, I'm Vassan Srinivasan, Chairperson of the Mental Health Foundation Australia. It's a privilege to lead this wonderful community-based mental health organisation in its 91st year of establishment. The MHFA has grown strength to strength over the past few years, with Victorian Mental Health Month in 2018, the National Mental Health Month occurring in 2019, 2020 and this year in 2021. Last year, COVID-19 did not stop us from achieving our National Mental Health Month campaign. I'm proud to say we successfully shifted many events to a virtual platform, very much being able to pursue our objectives of raising awareness and advocating for better Australian mental health. Our primary aim is to reach out to and educate as many Australians as possible, to help reduce stigma and to encourage constructive and non-judgmental dialogue on Australia's critical mental health issue. The highlight of last year's campaign was reaching out to 100,000 Australians all across the country for our National Walks for Mental Health, both virtually through our MHFA app and physically in some states. What a grand success that was. In 2021, with pandemic still affecting many of us, we decided not to give up once again, curating a carefully chosen blend of virtual and physical events for Australians to participate in. This year, we have a new and improved MHFA app, giving people the opportunity to participate in National Mental Health Month from the palms of their hands. This year, theme is mental health and post-pandemic recovery challenges and resilience. Mental Health Foundation Australia is proud to partner with Australian technology business DB Results and take up the well-being app Am I OK? To support our members, enabling individuals to regularly check in on a private and secure platform and ask the question, Am I OK? Am I OK also alerts the user when it's time to seek outside help. We thank DB Results for this opportunity to promote well-being and early intervention. This year, we have launched a special initiative, the Mental Health Appeal on the 10th of October, our World Mental Health Day. Through this, we aim to raise funds for the development of a course promoting life and safety in young people. At the MHFA, we pride ourselves in making sure all our programs are for the community and powered by the community. We have a vast growing network of multicultural ambassadors, youth ambassadors, and future leaders who further the community voice in promoting mental health and well-being. Our multicultural network has inspired our educational and multicultural webinars as an initiative to assist individuals cope with success during the pandemic. I would like to take this moment to thank our board directors and patrons, scientific advisory committee members, our wonderful staff, multicultural and youth ambassadors, future leaders, MHFA members and major sponsors for their continuous support to our organization as we continue to work to deepen understanding of the importance of mental well-being and educating the community. Let's work in solidarity for the benefit of our mental health. Thank you, Australia.
I would now like to invite Mr. Vassan Srinivasan, Chairperson of Mental Health Foundation Australia, to welcome you all. Mr. Vassan Srinivasan is currently Chairperson of Mental Health Foundation Australia. He has pioneered many new ventures at the Mental Health Foundation Australia, such as National Mental Health Month. He strongly believes in the power of community and supporting community. Vassan has been involved in mental health in the community in a voluntary position for many years, before being appointed as Vice Chairperson and now Chairperson of the Mental Health Foundation Australia. Vassan is also the first Indian to be appointed on the Australian Multicultural Council and also Chair of the Confederation of Indian Association of Australia, as well as patron of the Australian Indian Business Council. Please join me in welcoming Vassan.
Thank you, Lucia, and good evening. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we meet this morning. And I pay my respects to the elder, past, present, and emerging. I also extend this same respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples here with us this morning. I welcome you all today as we discuss a very important topic, as the mental health of Australia's construction workforce requires an in-depth focus. With over 625,000 people being employed within this industry, it makes it one of Australia's biggest and ultimately one that we should be paying much more attention to, especially due to the impacts of COVID-19. There is still considerable stigma that surrounds mental health in construction, preventing many individuals to speak openly and come forth to seek help. This is the first thing that we should be targeting. By creating more conversations about this topic, we hope to create an environment in which construction workers feel safe and empowered to address their mental health. The Australian building and construction industry has created a 5-pillar blueprint for mental health. These include reducing the harmful impacts of work, providing mental health and suicide prevention literacy, facilitating early intervention and treatment, providing return to work and ongoing support, and promoting work's positive impact on mental health. This comprehensive framework lists one of the first pillars of providing mental health literacy. Through this event, we aim to provide a stronger base to this foundation. It is our interest to continue breaking down stigma, which continues to be a major barrier of our construction workers in Australia. At the foundation, one of our major pillars surrounds education. We encourage the importance of creating education opportunities when it comes to mental health. Education and the increase of knowledge then allows appropriate actions to be taken. For each of our events during National Mental Health Awareness Campaign, we will be putting together a list of our own recommendations, which we plan to share with local, state, and federal governments to ensure reform is made from the top down, but also from the bottom up. I thank you once again for joining us this morning. Let us make sure mental health and suicide do not remain taboo within this virtual vital industry. Thank you, and I pass it back to Lucia.
Thank you so much, Vassan, for your support. I believe that without your support during all these years, Mental Health Foundation Australia wouldn't be as amazing and successful as it is today. I would now like to invite Jeremy Forbes, founder of HALT, Hope Assistance Local Tradies. Jeremy is a trade qualified painter and decorator in Castlemaine for almost 20 years. Jeremy has experienced the highs and lows associated with the building industry financially, physically, and mentally, and would like tradies to be more conscious of how depression, stress, tiredness, and frustration can impact their lives and loved ones around them. Please join me in welcoming Jeremy.
Thank you, Lucia, and thank you, Vassan, for having me on this. I'd like to acknowledge I'm also as Lucia said, in Castlemaine, Central Victoria, Jar Jar Warrant country, and acknowledge their elders, past, present, and the future leaders, and also acknowledging that the increased pressure, the stress, the rates of mental health and suicide that amongst our Indigenous people, and how much work there is still to do with them to help them through it. So I'm talking, as Lucia said, I'm a tradie, painter and decorator, and I relate to a lot of the things as already Vassan has been talking about. And I think he mentioned 625,000 in the construction industry. And if that's correct, that's just construction workers. And for HALT, it's about the construction workers, but it's also about, their family, their community, the hardware stores, the trade stores, the supply depots, the factory, the manufacturing plants. It's a whole of community approach that we need to improving mental health and reducing the rates of suicide, which is what HALT is about. It's really steeped in the building blocks, and the strong foundations are in the community. Those of you that don't know HALT, Hope Assistance Local Tradies, I co-founded with Catherine Pilgrim in 2013 after the suicide of a tradie in Campbell's Creek, just outside of Castlemaine. And there was that realisation, and we talk about the culture, the tough, strong, stoic, powerful, you'll be right, she'll be right, nature of the construction industry is detrimental to potentially talking about your feelings. And that's where I found myself in 2013 in Castlemaine at a wake, and the conversations that troubled me that started the HALT journey wasn't about, hey, we should do something about this. As a community, there was none of that. It was, who's next? You know, we know what people are going through in our community, but we don't acknowledge it. We don't talk about it because that parts of that culture. So I got a phone call from Catherine, and she said, let's do something for the tradies. And I said, great. Long story short, we decided to do a Save Your Bacon Brekkie at a hardware store. Why a hardware store? Well, mostly tradies like hardware stores. It's a place they can come, they can talk, they can socialise, they get their tools, they get their equipment, they get all that sort of stuff. So we did one there, and we had 30, 40, 50 tradies, but we also had other members of the community, people with lived experience, younger people, community members, council members, and also support services, which is critical, especially in this post-pandemic recovery, which I'll get to. So that's where we started in 2013. We did an event in Castlemaine, we did an event in Bendigo, and as Vassan mentioned, it's about community. Yeah, because Holt started with nothing. There wasn't any funding, there wasn't anything but a need from the community. So that community could be a hardware store, that community could be a building site, it could be a factory, it could be part of an industrial estate. These are all little microcosms of communities. So for us, it was Castlemaine, then we went to Bendigo to a hardware store, and then word of mouth spread. We started doing more events. We went to TAFE and started speaking with apprentices. When we talk about a post-pandemic recovery, we need to, critical aspect of what we believe at Holt is apprentices. So they're the future tradies. They're the future of the building and construction industry. So at present, that's one of our focuses. But we just went along for years, just making sacrifices, promoting Holt, and we ran on a belief that we needed to change, that we need to change from the grassroots up. So that was good. We went interstate. I was lucky enough to get a social change fellowship with Westpac. Then I did a TED talk, which has had 1.5 million views, I'm not sure. But what it did reiterate for me was that tradies across Australia and tradies across the world in the construction industry face a lot of the same issues, the same problems and concerns. And we were lucky enough, Holt, in 2019 to be given $2 million over 4 years by the Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt, to start building a national program. We're being evidence evaluated by Swinburne. So we know that, yes, it's grassroots and it's community, but we know we're hitting the places we need to. Those key places that involve the construction industry and tradies are obviously hardware stores and trade stores. We go into council depots, so local shire governments. As you said, we go to TAFE, and we're looking at doing some real big work at TAFEs across Victoria and Australia. And that will involve hopefully embedding Holt workers into those places and also evidence and evaluating that. But that's more to come. So that's exciting. But we're already working in these areas. Also, obviously, domestic and commercial building, because you know what? It doesn't matter if you're on a building site with a 90-floor apartment building going up, you should be able to access the same support services as a small little group of 1, 3, 5 guys and a couple of apprentices on a building site in Melton or Dandenong. You should be able to have access to mental health and post-pandemic recovery support services if you're in a factory in an industrial estate in Cranbourne or you're in an industrial estate in Sunbury. You know, we need to be getting out to those places. And why is that important? Because we know the high suicide rate for men and the places that Holt go, our workers go to, is places that are very vulnerable. Why? Is because we go to those building sites and those industrial estates where there's tens of thousands of workers. No one goes there. Why? Because our workers go there and people say, what are you doing here? No one comes in here. What are you doing in this industrial estate? No one's ever come to talk about mental health. So, you know, as a system, we're sort of neglecting that a little bit. So that's what Holt wants to do, get into those areas. I think it's also important in the post-pandemic recovery that this whole stuff around mental health and suicide prevention, and as Vassan said, the importance of education and breaking the stigma. It's not a 9-to-5 problem. It's not a 9-to-5 solution, okay? We need to be getting, as we do and other groups do, out there at 6:30 in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, on the building sites, in the industrial estates, talking to them, walking around, having those conversations. Or it could be 8 o'clock at a shift change at a factory in Ballarat Road, Sunshine. So it doesn't matter where, but we need to be flexible, agile. This whole, we talk about being flexible and agile and pivoting when it comes to the pandemic. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to recovery around mental health. Currently, Holt's funded to work in the Northwest Melbourne PHN areas and also in the Southeast Melbourne PHN areas. And we are hoping through the support of the primary health networks and the Department of Health and Greg Hunt and the Federal Parliament that we can, you know, build that national program and work across communities all across Melbourne, Victoria and Australia. We're also being evidence evaluated by Swinburne. We're seeing that some of the main issues that they're faced out there, whether that's current or post-pandemic, is relationships and finance. So we know those two are the biggest, along with, well, let's go gambling, let's go sleep, grief, loss, bullying, alcohol, drugs, harassment. You know, we know all these things are affecting our tradies. So it's okay to have a day or a month or whatever, but we need to drill down into some real core support and understanding of those specific elements, especially finance and relationships. You know, get the financial counsellors, get the relationship counsellors, get them out onto the building sites. That community engagement is critical. And how do we adhere? So actually, before I say talk about the support services and how we, because I think in a post-pandemic, we need to drill down into the community supports. So the tradies, the construction workers in whatever region, suburb they're in, need to know what's there, what supports are there on a community, local, state and national. So I'm here to tell you, when it comes to the construction industry, not every tradie knows how to access and help their health and well-being. They don't know what support services are out there. So it is about community engagement. And for us at a Holt talk, let's say it's 6:30 in the morning, we're on a building site in Melton with 10 guys, 50 guys. We talk about the origins of Holt because we use the tradie language. So it's empowering them because they trust us. We're authentic and we use the language that we know. So we're talking to a bunch of tradies as a tradie, yeah? So we talk about that. We talk about the risk factors. We talk about support services. We talk about how to be a good listener. We talk about having the tough conversations. And we talk about debunking the myths around suicide. But we also finish with a bit of self-love, self-care and support. When it talks about, and we do, we're a health promotions charity, yeah? So we promote anything and everyone, whether it's a local, state, national. Different people need different support services. You've got to provide it, whether it's an EAP, whether it's Gamblers Help, Lifeline, Headspace, the local, doctor's clinic, GP clinic, psychologist clinic. We need to just give everyone a chance to shop around, for want of a better word, to access support. Because not one support doesn't help everyone, okay? There's not one size fits all. What helps one person won't help another one. So we need to provide a holistic, rounded view with all different sorts of solutions. As I said, we promote local, state and national, and working with Northwest Melbourne PHN and the Southeast Melbourne PHN. And as we spread around the country, around Melbourne, Victoria, regional Victoria, Australia and the globe, one of the most important things in a post-pandemic, as I said before, is giving the construction and trade industries support services. So it's not just giving them a piece of paper and saying, here are the numbers. It's about integrating into the community. How do we do that? And we're doing that with Northwest, Southeast Melbourne PHN. We have this thing called Holt-friendly clinics. Why are Holt-friendly clinics important? Is because if you're on, say, a building site in Melton, in the Northwest Melbourne region, then apart from me saying, you need to call Lifeline, Headspace, Men's Line, Kids Helpline, whatever it is, I want you to be able to, before work, at lunchtime or after work, potentially engage and interact with a local GP clinic or a local doctor's clinic. So for me as a tradie, I'm like, I won't go and access help because I can't see a doctor. I can't see a psychologist. There's no room. There's no capacity. Well, we want to take that away from the construction workers, that excuse to a point. Sometimes there is long waiting times. I get that. But we want you to have a choice. We want you to be going, I'm going to get on the Holt website on my phone, holt.org.au, go to the Holt-friendly clinics, and I can find a doctor's clinic or a GP clinic, a psychologist clinic in the local area, in the local suburb where I am, and I'm going to engage with them. And when I ring them, they're going to know about Holt because our Holt project workers have been out there engaging with that GP clinic or that psychologist clinic, telling them about Holt, what sort of issues there are, what's going to happen when a tradie rings up, and do they have capacity in this clinic to see the workers? Do they understand about men's mental health and some of the risk factors with that? And they have a sticker, they have our resources there, and the men and women in the building construction industry can safely ring up, go there and know know what it's about, that they support HALT, they know what HALT's about. We've got, I think, over 100 clinics that are supporting us, and we work with the Northwest Melbourne PHN through their GP engagement team to facilitate this stuff. So it's about collaborating, it's about partnering and working together. So we work with Northwest Melbourne GP engagement team, we send emails out, the clinics come back to us, we go and meet up with the clinics and talk to them and have a meeting, educate their staff, hear about their support services. So that HALT-friendly clinic component is very unique, as well as us promoting, whether it's Anglicare, Gamblers Help, Victims Assistance. We obviously talk about Lifeline, and it's about just normalising the conversation. Because a lot of us with our culture don't use the word suicide in the conversation or really know what to say and how to say it. So as Vassan said earlier, we need to educate, raise awareness, and then talk about language and correct use of language. And obviously, we're very keen to get into the multicultural sectors. We've had preliminary discussions with the Asylum Seekers Resource Centre. We're going into factories where there's a high rate of Vietnamese workers there, so it's getting our resources translated through Northwest Melbourne PHN, or where we can through the PHN, and it's about engagement, because we did an event, and I'll finish up on this, we did an event in Chisholm TAFE in Dandenong, which is one of the most beautiful, amazing events, with about 100 Afghani tradies who were learning English, and we had a halal food truck come in, and we met with the Afghani community leaders beforehand to understand their cultural sensitivity and the stuff they were telling us. I said to them when they finished talking, that's the same stuff that the Australian Aussie tradies go through. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And so it was about use of language, and because they were learning English, slowing down how I talk, because I can obviously talk quick, I get a bit excited. And we had a wonderful session for about an hour with 100 Afghanis. And it was beautiful. It was really lovely. A lot of openness and discussion. So that's what I want to finish on, that this mental health and suicide prevention and ideology and ideation, this affects everyone, no matter what culture you're from, and you're male or female or whatever you are. It affects everyone, and it needs a whole of community approach. And I think we can do that working together. Lucia, can I pass it back to you? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for all of that. As a person who runs her own building and maintenance company and worked in the construction and property industry with Regent estate agents for the last 6 years, I can understand how important HALT would be to the actual trade community, to be able to speak the actual language where it's industry specific, where tradies and construction workers will be very more comfortable in actually talking to someone about mental health. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for being here with us today and for your support. As a token of our appreciation, we'll be posting something to you.
Wow, thank you.
So now I would like to invite Stuart Taylor, CEO and Springfox. Stuart's early career includes periods of rapid advancement within organisations as diverse as the Royal Australian Air Force, KPMG and Heinz, developing his broad experience in aerospace engineering, IT, finance and psychology. Stuart has become a strong advocate for incorporating cultural practices into Australian workplace to nurture well-being through the body, heart, mind and spirit. Stuart formalised this resolve in 2003, founding the Resilience Institute in Australia, now Springfox. Please join me in welcoming Stuart Taylor.
Thanks very much, Lucia. I might just share my screen. Just 1 second here. Right, hopefully everybody can see that there. Can I get a thumbs up, Lucia? If you can see that. Great, excellent. So thanks very much for the opportunity to be part of your conference. I think it is, as everyone previous to me speaking have mentioned, this is such a huge topic, and it's a discussion that we've been having at Springfox with our communities and with our clients for around 20 years now. And, it's interesting and really great that it is starting to become such a central conversation that really didn't exist before. So I think that's got to be huge positive. So our thinking is coming much more from the perspective of resilience as a protective approach to building mental health, wellness, and I guess me being at my best, let alone what that means for the organisation that I am part of. And I suppose as part of this sharing that I'd like to do with you is to talk about not only the implications for the individuals working in construction companies, who are a lot of our clients, but also for the leaders who are making choices as to how to lead those organisations. And look, the research that we have published makes it very clear the role of those leaders is just so fundamental to whether that organisation will operate with good mental health or will struggle from a psychological safety perspective. And so perhaps to give you some of the additional backgrounds we see from a construction industry perspective, we would suggest there are a whole bunch of themes that no doubt you would be across that are quite common in this sector. Shift work in many cases is very much the case. An engineering, if you like, technical mindset is quite key, quite common. And with that comes the necessary skills to do the job. Unfortunately, from a resilience perspective, what that brings can be a more pessimistic view of life. And so it's an interesting juggling act to say, how do I do my job well, but not become, I guess, somebody who does take setbacks in a negative way. What else do we know? It is a more masculine culture. I think Jeremy mentioned that in his presentation, as well as often can be isolation from families, particularly with a lot of these projects that are being undertaken at the moment right across the country. Huge growth is going on in this sector, which is just fantastic for the sector. What that does mean, though, is again the hours that come with that. Also from a disconnect from the family work, sports and so on. And of course, the associated consequences for safety adherence, which we know is a real issue that comes in this sector and is not unrelated to the fact that there are substantial mental health issues. In our own research that we published a couple of years ago, we showed that of all of the sectors out there that were in our global survey of over 24,000 people, that the construction sector rates the lowest when it comes to resilience. And the numbers that you see there are called resilience ratios out of our own diagnostic instrument. And unfortunately, when you see the average sitting at 1.9, an ideal position is closer to 2.5. The construction sector definitely has space to grow, which is, I guess the opportunity that we would all know, being aware of the sector anyway. The good news is when you start to look at this research from a change perspective, from a responsiveness perspective, it's actually the opposite way around. And so the willingness of this sector to adjust to different behaviours around resilience is actually huge, which is really outstanding. The capacity is there. And I think part of that is a more technical sector with that openness to the evidence that does sit around building resilience and getting that sense of mental health back in line. So what is this thing called resilience? At Springfox, we use this definition, and I'm sure you would have your own definition. Many bring it back to this last point here around bouncing back. And from a mental health perspective, many would say that's where it starts and stops. And look, it is part of it. It really is. But I've got to say, life is a bit more than just getting back to level zero. And I'm sure you would agree, that that's the case. In fact, life surely is about thriving, enjoying life, spending time with friends, enjoying family, whatever that might be for you. That doesn't happen when you're in this downward spiral that you can see here in this model that says, I've got so much on my plate, priorities are all over the place. I don't even know what I should be working on. My brain is starting to shut down in disengagement, in withdrawal. I'm doubting myself and my ability to cope. At the vulnerable level, I'm physically compromised. My immune system is crashing. Distress level, I can't sleep. I can't get to sleep. I can't stay asleep. And then ultimately, the bottom of this spiral is this place called depression. And this downward spiral is such a fundamental journey that we can go on. And it is arguably around resilience practices that allows us to not only be aware of this journey, but also to deploy skills to come north towards a place of resilience. And that's where these top elements are looking. This bouncing forward then starts to look at things like courage, creativity, and connection, and how do I embrace life rather than find myself struggling. So mastery of stress, staying calm, building physical energy, and I think was mentioned earlier in terms of exercise and so on, and engaging emotions, so having those emotions that are more functional and positive rather than dysfunctional and deregulated. Train the mind to have thoughts that are realistic and optimistic, and then spirit in action. Ultimately, I think this is where resilience really sits. And to look at this 11th stage model, we can say when we work with our clients, it's all about how do I personally find myself moving up this model, but also as an organization, where do we sit? And, you know, as Vassan was talking about this whole idea of post-pandemic recovery, it's not going to happen when you've got too many people that are spending too much time in this downward spiral. And I know for a lot of our clients at the moment, the whole conversation is in 2020, we didn't really do that much for our people. It was more about survival. In 2021, it is now about how do we emerge from the pandemic and do so in a way where we get back to being the people that we want to be and have the lifestyles that we want to have. So this post-pandemic recovery absolutely is intertwined with this idea of fostering resilience, as was also mentioned there before. And so as we do continue down this discussion, this is research that we conducted during the pandemic, particularly focused on the Australian workforce and the response to COVID, and interestingly was called a call for courage, connection and compassion. And what we saw here was that workloads had gone through the roof. And I think that was absolutely the case in the construction sector. You would be able to attest to that. Productivity stayed pretty well line ball. And as a consequence, adjusting for that workload meant that stress levels also went through the roof there in this third column here. This is not sustainable. And it really just speaks to a conversation, again, that we're having quite consistently, that there is a mental illness tsunami coming our way. And I think when we start to look at that consequence, what does it mean for our organisations? What does it mean for me as an individual? As Jeremy mentioned also, what does it mean for our families and community that hang off those participants in the sector? I think for construction, our data showed the workload, so this first column, had increased 33%, and stress levels also, interestingly, increased 33%. And you go, well, that's interesting. What am I doing to, yes, play hard, but also to bring that back down to a place where I can actually thrive? So interesting to see that play out. I thought it'd be useful to share with you a case study of one of our construction clients that we have been working with for some years now. You would know who they are, but I cannot share who they are. And interesting to see how they approached very much what we are talking about as this theme for Mental Health Month, and very much this idea of building a post-pandemic recovery through fostering resilience. And what we noticed with this organisation is that their average resilience ratio prior to this intervention was sitting at a very low level of 1.61 to 1, which is lower than that construction average that I showed you there before. So clearly an organisation that was struggling anyway. And equally, that data showed that those with poor resilience, which we defined as a resilience ratio of less than 1.5 to 1, it was around 45% of that population. So quite a significant number of those people were not doing so well. And some of the key risks that we measured here is they were experiencing high levels of overload, high levels of intensity. And in a way, what does come with the sector is, and maybe that's part of that masculine aspect, high levels of self-critical in terms of my capacity to accept what I've done. And so when we look at these pre-intervention results, we started to say, well, how can we help this group to move forward from this? And a lot of the work that we did was not only with staff, but was also with the leaders of these construction teams. And the work here around resilient leadership says, of course, it's around your typical leadership skills, but it's also about how do you lead your staff to be more resilient. When change happens, how can you coach them to take that on board in a more agile way rather than to not be in that space? I mean, the other aspect to that, and I'll share it with you in a second, is that we also looked at, from a trust and compassion perspective, what was in place with those leaders and how they interacted with their staff. And so as we went through this experience with this population, these are the sorts of things that we did in terms of education, assessments, design workshops, particularly around shift work, coaching. And the result was really significant in terms of growth in resilience, reductions in mental illness symptoms, improvements in mastery of stress and train the mind, and a shift to resilience ratio of 2.09, which is far above the industry average around this, for this sector. And you can see there's some of the results here. There's the 46% coming down the coloured side of the model. Again, significant growth and a really nice result for this population of 103 people in this particular construction company. So really happy with that. And it also shows that, in a way, part of the pathway to dealing with mental illness, to achieve mental health, is actually by pursuing resilience, which is in effect what this program did. How do you build those practical skills around sleep, emotions, thoughts, stress, mastery, to actually build that resilience? So one last comment I'll make before I do hand back, to say that just to come back to the point around what the work we actually did with leaders, a lot of our work does actually focus on working with people and building the skills around resilience, engagement, and mental health. Absolutely critical. Over the last 5 years, we've more and more done work with leaders on how do you create a high trust, high compassion environment. You can imagine in the construction sector, this has been an extra walk, and we are getting there, I think it's fair to say. But unless you can get leaders to operating with high trust and compassion, you can be as resilient as you want. It becomes a very struggling environment and leads to low psychological safety. And so to get these 6 hexagons working with you is in essence what we think is so important if you're wanting to have a post-pandemic recovery. Thank you so much for your time. Hopefully that is of help as I do hand back to you, Lucia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Taylor. And as a token of our appreciation, we will post a gift to you.
Thank you very much.
So now I would like to invite Brad Pearce. Brad has been employed in the health and community services sector for over 20 years. During this time, he has held positions across community and primary health, alcohol and other drugs, and youth justice. He is currently the Director, Priority Populations Health and Wellbeing at Northwestern Melbourne Primary Health Network, and has responsibility for the commissioning of evidence-based services targeting a range of vulnerable communities and building the capacity of services to deliver culturally safe care. Please join me in welcoming Brad Pearce.
Thanks so much, Lucia. I'll just share my screen. If you could just confirm you can see that?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Look, thanks very much for the opportunity. And before I get started, I'd also like to acknowledge that each of us, wherever we're calling from, the lands that we're on, and pay respect to Aboriginal elders, past, present, and emerging. Look, thank you, Jeremy and Stuart. I think both presentations really reflect, I guess, the complexity of what we're currently experiencing across our communities, but also, the construction industry being a bit of a microcosm in a way of a workforce that we're probably seeing publicly play out, I think, through some of the narrative that we're seeing in the media and the like. Something that I was thinking this morning, just sort of thinking about how today was going to go, was, I felt a few times over the last 18 months, I would have loved to have had this work done earlier, but even as of last week, I was thinking, wow, it's actually quite timely. So it feels like it just reflects the journey, I think, that's happened over the last 18 months, particularly for the construction industry and other workforces, the ebbs and flows and the impact that that's having on the general community and how it might play out. And what I think Jeremy and Stuart were highlighting is how what sort of supports, what sort of conversations need to take place to really demystify, destigmatize this notion of what it is to sort of acknowledge vulnerabilities, to acknowledge you might need help, or your mates or your friends might need help, which is something that was a focus of our work. So what I'd like to do over the next sort of 10 or so minutes is just talk you through a campaign that we engaged and embarked on to really target, people in construction industry, and also just wanted to just show you a quick snippet towards the end of what that campaign looks like. So just before I sort of get started, just want to give you a sense of what sort of drove some of our thinking. And I think Jeremy referenced the PHN a few times in Northwest Melbourne. This is a broad overlay of what our community looks like, quite large, with projected growth over the next decade or so. I think that very much spoke to what certainly our thinking was around why target the construction industry in this particular program, was because I think, as Jeremy referenced, we cover, and for a geographic region, the Melbourne Central Business District, so would encompass that, the work that happens in high-rise sort of construction, but also those outer growth corridors, particularly in the north and the west. So we're acutely aware of that, a number of our LGAs in our regions highlighted, have the greatest population growth anywhere in the country, and particularly the likes of Hume and Melton and Wyndham. And so we knew that there was just such a vast spread of domestic sort of residential build happening. And, we were often, when thinking about this work, trying to capture what do we actually mean by the construction industry? And we're certainly not the experts. And I wanted to talk you through some of the things we've done to try to understand that better. But I think we wanted to understand is the breadth and the diversity across the community, which is probably referenced in that centre point around the number of languages spoken at home. I think it's, in different areas, over 40 and close to 50% in some LGAs of people who were born outside of Australia speak another language at home, which again just reflects the diversity. And I think Jeremy specifically mentioned the need to tailor messages to particular, cultural cohorts, I guess, to ensure that they are accurate and, that just not generic sort of conversations. And just that third point probably picks up on this notion of post-pandemic recovery. Is I wasn't aware of this until someone helped, put it into this slide, that actually a significant number of the cases in this country have occurred in northwest Melbourne, and that's not wouldn't be a surprise. Even in the current sort of outbreak, we know that it's often it's hitting so many other regions, but north and west of Melbourne particularly get identified as having high case numbers. So we know that that's something that's played out for communities over that last 18 months. So I guess when you bring the needs of what's happening through COVID and the issues of mental health and supports and this public narrative and dialogue that's happening, and the Royal Commission into mental health services really speaks to a bit of a, dare I say, a perfect storm. It's certainly not perfect, is it, by any stretch, but to really sort of call these points out and to engage in these conversations robustly and honestly. So this particular piece of work was, I guess, around reflecting that growth that I've referenced. What we did is we spent a bit of time trying to understand where we needed to head with this, and we actually initiated some conversations with mental health organisations as the pandemic was starting. So it was, literally early 2020, we started to conceptualise this. We really struggled to, I guess, understand what the scope of the work looked like. So we engaged Ellis Jones, a consultancy agency, who we knew already had links with some key stakeholders, really showed an expertise in this space. And we really wanted to understand I guess what the current lay of the land was, as certainly this is not our expertise. So we wanted to really, respect the work that was already happening. And I think, the work that Jeremy's led through Holt and other organisations, and I've got I've done some work in the past with IncoLink and the like. So really wanted to sort of acknowledge that space, understand the expertise, and then build on that. So, it's a bit of conversations even to land the initial project. So the work that Ellis Jones sort of undertook was, looking at some of the research that undertaken by Mates in Construction. And as you can see through those points, sort of really pointed out issues that both Jeremy and Stuart highlighted, elevated risk of mental health and suicide risk in people working across construction environments, stigma, what was and continues to be, I think, I've heard the term this morning reference that masculine sort of, environments, but noting something that when we looked at that initial scoping, we also understood that were many women working in construction as well. So we wanted to ensure that we, I guess, could think about and develop a bit of a campaign that reflected that. The challenges with help-seeking behaviours, absolutely critical around how do you know when it's time to talk to someone, or how can you see in someone else, a friend or a loved one that might be struggling, of what they can do. And so I think, again, what I wanted to show you in the campaign, we tried to target not only people in the construction industry, but also family and friends, that if they recognise signs or were worried. Obviously, the significant unique workplace stresses. So I think that's even just been magnified over this last period, and again, very much played out in the media of recent. But managing a small business in challenging environments over the last 18 months, flexing to different restrictions and I guess impacts on staff as well, who are navigating their own personal journeys through this pandemic. So we know that work-life balance has been a real challenge, and particularly of recent times. The data supports the high risk of around suicide and, you know, ideation. And I think as Jeremy said, it wasn't a conversation the way he described it around what to do. It was around, it's just a matter of time of what's next. So I think that feeds into the need to sort of really, you know, continue to have these conversations. And also, as I think Stuart referenced, those, you know, anxiety and depression, just that spiral, I think, is well described around how for anybody that can happen. And I guess this is a cohort that we really felt you know, deserved sort of some attention, knowing that that help seeking was a challenge. So what we did in partnership with Ellis Jones, you know, the goal of the program was really to challenge attitudes and behaviours around mental health. Even that terminology, mental illness, is something that, you know, is still got stigma around it, isn't it? So if we, you know, can change the conversation or support the conversation around well-being, around looking after yourself, around looking after your mates, just like you look after your finances, or look after your family, or look after the work requirements, is how do you look after your well-being? And just to, I guess, you know, by creating those conversations, also decreasing stigma. So as I referenced earlier, co-design, I know that's a term that's sort of thrown around, but there was a really key part of Ellis Jones's work is speaking with key people across construction and mental health providers, people with lived experience, to understand what the issues were and what an appropriate response would look like. You know, tested some campaign ideas. So, you know, what I wanted to show you is where we landed, but there were some ideas around, you know, what is the right messaging? How do we pitch it? What does it need to look and feel like? And certainly not something within my expertise, but that was the benefit of working with Ellis Jones, the communication entity, who were able to present us with an understanding of what they were hearing. And then I guess in consultation with key people, design a storyboard that actually showed the key messaging and what the sort of key points were, and then saw that through to actually delivering the output, the product. You know, luckily we were able to launch the campaign last month, and I must say, you know, social media and sort of radio channels has been the key avenues. And probably something that I'll finish on is the fact of where we are now. Even a month ago, 2 months ago, we didn't realise probably how important these conversations would be, even right now. And that probably leads into probably 6 to 8 months ago, at the beginning of this year, I was saying to colleagues, oh, I wish we had this finished because it would be so timely. And then I said that again a couple of weeks ago. So again, it just shows that journey. Probably we were very lucky in regards to filming of that it actually happened between lockdowns, if there was such a thing. It was just, it wasn't, I would love to say it was by design, but it was nearly by a bit of luck that we had a period where we weren't locked down and we were able to come together and shoot videos and do some interviews and the like. And then all of a sudden we found ourselves in lockdown again. So the launch of the campaign was quite timely in regards to those challenges. What I'd like to do now is just show you just the video. I believe that sound should be all good, and this just goes for a minute. And I just want, this is the minute video that's going through social media that's targeting people in the construction industry themselves.
Okay, bring it back. That's it. Can you straighten up?
We all carry a lot of stuff around, but we don't have to do it alone.
Put it over there.
When things get heavy, we ask someone to give us a hand.
Yeah.
The longer you carry stuff, the heavier it gets. So if you're stressed about life or work, talk to someone about it early before it really starts to weigh you down. Call Head to Help, a free service that connects you to the right support. It could be someone to talk to, or where to go for advice, or to other local services that can help. Give them a call, don't wait. There are lots of people ready to give you a hand and lighten the load.
A guy that played like first grade rugby. Yeah.
So I guess, there is another video which I won't show that's only a 15-second similar, same visuals, but narrative around targeting family and friends which is really targeting if you are worried about someone else. Another piece to this campaign, which is a bit of a support, was something that I was asked to do, was an explainer video. And that was really
We all
around
carry a
just me taking the opportunity to sort of, I guess, talk through similar to what I'm saying today, but really around what drove the idea, what was the intent, and how do people, particularly those that are worried about, family members or friends, and can see a change in behaviour that I think is reflected by what Jeremy and Stuart have said earlier, that, if somebody is, usually very social and you've seen a change in that, if they're, obviously it's a challenge in lockdown because we're not supposed to be social, but, as we emerge out of this, if you're recognizing a real difference, if people are getting stressed over things that, they certainly wouldn't have in the past, what are those indicators that may, seek to? And as we know, a lot of people may not know where to get help. So I guess that was really the idea of the explainer video, was to describe, this is what you can do. If you're worried about someone, where can you go for information, not only to find out what you can say to others, but also how do you get support for yourself? Obviously, just to sort of wrap up, obviously measuring the outcomes of a campaign similar to this is really difficult, because it's, apart from counts on a hits on a website or calls to the Head to Help service, it's difficult to measure, but it is something we're looking to explore. Again, just some indicators which again may not be directly related to this, but we think there's something in it, is an increase in male callers to our Head to Help intake number. I'll talk about Head to Help just on the next slide to wrap everything up. And just to note, one of our hubs in Wyndham has actually seen an 8% increase over the last month of people who identify working in construction. So again, not to saying that they got their the reason to call through this campaign, but again, it's something as an indicator that we're looking at. And also obviously the campaign, the views that have been seen over social media, YouTube and websites. Importantly, I guess what we want to do is continue to share through local media, people and organisations. On the next page, I've got some links, and really encourage our intent, and particularly in this notion of this post-pandemic recovery, is that we'll continue to promote the campaign, and try to find further opportunities to explore its utility. And just to finish off, I just wanted to flag where we are, because I guess the work of Holt and Mates in Construction really valuable. Another service that we commission is called Head to Help, which was actually evolved out of the pandemic just over 12 months ago. Actually, after the first major lockdown in Victoria, the federal government acknowledged that Victoria had gone through some specific sort of, I guess, concerns, and being the most lockdown state at that time, there was dedicated funding to set up these models. So what we've actually done is add a tradies sort of page and landing point to the Head to Help platform, to try to encourage and supported people that answer the phones to understand, and further support this campaign. Obviously, though, that's about trying to direct people to write, mental health supports. And just to, there's a website there. Our website has got that campaign, also the Head to Help, page as well, if you're able to share that, and my email address. So if you had any queries or questions, the intent moving forward, as I said, is to continue to share the resource, to have the conversations and support the organisations such as Holt and others to, I guess, continue having what are sometimes or often considered really difficult conversations. Thanks very much for the opportunity. I hope you find the resource and campaign useful, and welcome your feedback at any point. And I'll hand it over to you, Lucia.
Thank you so much, Brad. To start off with, as the owner of a building maintenance company, Phoenixman Property Services, I'd like to thank you for acknowledging women in the property and construction workforce, because for me, as a woman, it is important as well to see the landscape of both men and women who accompany in this industry. it's not hard to see how much stress this pandemic has been put in the construction industry just by looking at the news and all the protests that's been going on. So with the stress levels of the workplace and everything, is so important for all the things that all the speakers here have been contributing to mental health. So thank you, Brad, so much for being with us today. And as a token of our appreciation, we'll be sending something to you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So now we would like to have a panel discussion about the important topics with our speakers this far. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat, which our speakers will be directed to. So I've already got some questions here that's been posted in our questions and answers, and you can all feel free to join in the discussion. Question 1 was, what are some of the psychosocial hazards for construction workers, and how can they be minimized?
Where are these questions, Lucia?
In the questions and answers. I'll repeat the question here. What are some of the psychosocial hazards for construction workers, and how can they be minimized?
But I would jump in and perhaps make repeat the comment I made in my presentation, that the role of the leader in organisations, construction organisations, is so critical. And are they creating a culture that is minimising those psychosocial issues, or are they actually inadvertently or otherwise promoting that? And so is it much more of a political ego-based organisation, or is it one that is accepting vulnerability and openness to challenges? So I think there's a significant role for leaders in setting the beat of the drum there and leading by example.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Stuart. I also think that, by breaking the stigma for mental health and having more conversations, that would also assist in the psychosocial hazards. So question 2 is, to what extent can bullying or harassment in the construction worksite lead to psychological distress?
I'd be very interested in that one, because we know that that bullying and harassment does lead to anxiety and depression and thoughts of suicide, and indeed suicide. And it comes back to those psychosocial cultural norms that we're used to, that bullying and the harassment is so prevalent in the building and construction industry, especially when I was there, because that was what you did. And if you dare spoke up about it as an apprentice, and once again, why we need to target the apprentices is, that's, you just got to put up, you got to shut up and just take it. And we know that when you have to do that damn wall just builds and builds and builds. So for us, it's about, yes, talking about bullying and harassment, but calling it out, what it looks like, using the language. And I tell you, when we talk to tradies and go, how would you feel if your 17-year-old daughter or son on their first day experienced that? They're like, oh, we hate that, we wouldn't like that. It's like, well, don't do it. And it's a cycle we have to break, because we talk to apprentices and they go, that's all well and good, but I'm going to go back in the building site and my boss, who's old school, is going to tell me to shut up, put up with it. And that's just part of that culture. And the boss says, you know what, mate, why don't you shut up? And then when you get your apprentice, you can do the same thing to him or her. And it's that cycle through this education that Vassan and we've all talked about, is that education and making them aware of it, and also using that right language that's going to help, I think, cut down that bullying and harassment. Thank you.
a really good point, Jeremy, isn't it? And I think as you're describing that, thinking that talks to that top-down, bottom-up approach, but also not just in big construction businesses, but also at that local, for someone that owns a business, they've got 3 or 4 tradies working with, or subcontracting. It's the similar conversation, isn't it? But it needs to be hit at different levels, absolutely, to try to just take, to challenge that that sort of historical or, previous way of thinking about these. When someone shows vulnerabilities or is asking for help, I guess your experience would show if someone doesn't ask for help, then you often see it through either workplace injuries or non-attendance at work, absenteeism. It plays out in other ways, doesn't it, when someone's not travelling okay? I guess as now a requirement for employers of whatever size to be asking what's going on there. Are you okay? I guess is not the wrong question to ask, to at least open up where someone can tell you that they're not travelling well or that they need something different.
I think it's interesting. You can work on or help somebody to work on their resilience skills as much as you want. And look, we do that until the cows come home. It's a big part of what we do. But that's going to always be challenged if what's coming from the organisation or from the leaders or from the managers is not acceptable. It just makes it a really difficult encounter. And why would you even say unless you had to? It really needs to be a joint effort to change culture as well as help people to be more resilient. It's got to work hand in glove.
I agree totally. Also, as in my own experience being a woman in the trade industry, as a more vulnerable kind of gender, people would look at the actual construction work as being somewhere tough and somewhere where, it's male-based, and when you have a woman in there, then you're going to get a lot of comments and things like that. So breaking down that whole cultural understanding of the trade industry, especially in the construction part, is very important to accept, the young, the ones that just came in as an apprentice as well, who are still shaping their attitudes towards both women and men, and the actual cultural context around tradies and what they're supposed to be, and how they're supposed to have put up with all these bullying, whether they need to grow thicker skin or just put up with it. So it's a very important conversation to break down those stigmas and to change those cultural understandings, so everyone is respectful for each other in the industry. So it's a very important discussion. So question 3, as discussed, the stigma within the construction industry to seek help remains quite high. What are some ways to combat this?
I think from our experience at Springfox, we do our best. I think Brad and Jeremy also talked to this, as where possible, you make somebody's capacity to ask for that help to be confidential. So it doesn't have to be known to everybody. You can do it in a way where they can actually seek that help without it being, put into the newsletter. And so it can be done in a way that they can actually receive solid professional help without necessarily having to put their hand up to say, I'm struggling. So there's different ways you can do that without actually being another impediment for somebody to actually, put their hand up.
I think I am. Oh, sorry, have you finished, Stuart? I didn't want to.
I have, Jeremy. You get to go now.
When you talk about accessing help, you have to realise, I said this before, is that a lot of construction workers do not know where to go to get help, okay? At a very base level, they've probably heard of Beyond Blue, they've heard of Lifeline, but if you ask the average construction worker, where do I go to get help for my gambling or finance, they're going to struggle to answer that. So that's what we talk about. You have to give them, as a health promotions charity, whether it's 6:30 in the morning in an industrial estate, you've got to cut it down to the base level. This is what the PHNs have, their head to health. This is what Lifeline is, but also, you don't have to be suicidal to call Lifeline. You're having a crap day. Or this is for headspace for your young person. Or if you're having an issue with gambling, it's Gamblers Help and financial counselling. But then go the extra step, which is what we try and do, and say, this is what the financial counsellor will ask you. This is what their expectations are. This is what you get from them. So it's actually targeting, like we have in our research, financial relationships, bullying, harassment, sleep, and actually drilling into the support services and actually making them aware of what there are, even what a mental health care plan is at a GP. I'm talking about that base level, letting everyone know what that looks like, answering the questions, what to expect from a counsellor. Did not have to have just one counsellor. Like when you ask a group of 50 tradies, how many of you been to a counsellor? Once you start scratching the surface, the tradies, they talk. They start opening up and they're like, oh yeah, I have. How many counsellors? 4? And everyone's like, whoa, really? Yeah, I'm only going to 1 because that's what I'm supposed to do. And it's like, so educating them around those support services that you can go to as many counsellors as you want, or doctors, or get what you need. So we've got to really drill into that strong foundations of learnings around the support services and what they do.
I think, Jeremy, as well, isn't it, making sure, well, supporting those services to then understand the needs. How do you speak the language, as you described, is so important from the work that Holt is done. So, if somebody is going to call and they're, I think we'd support a lot of our services to understand if someone's going to call and they're not sure what to get, they're nearly testing the waters. So I think that's really critical, that we support services to understand, what should you need to know if someone from the construction industry, what are they going to bring different to someone else, maybe, how do you talk that language, which I think you started off your presentation with saying so critical.
Well, that's the thing, is that we're talking, Brad, we're doing that, as you said, with Northwest Melbourne, with the Holt-friendly clinics. So it's actually working with those clinics in the Northwest Melbourne, so they do understand, so they know when a tradie calls or a construction worker calls, just that language that they're going to use and trying to understand that language. So yes, the Holt-friendly clinics are already starting to try and break down that stigma and language.
I think a broader comment I'd make is around resilience is it's not an individual sport, it's a team sport. And I think part of what you're saying there, Jeremy and Brad, is what is my network that I'm building out there where I can actually be reaching out to people. It might be a family member, it might be, perhaps a trusted person in the workplace, or, a friend. Do I have that network that I'm building that I can be reaching out to? It doesn't have to be, necessarily to the work counsellor or whatever, but what is that network? It's so key to resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to also highlight a comment from Laurice Temple. She's commented that there is a need to also normalise the conversation about struggling. So I agree totally with that.
I think can I just add, Lizzie? I think part of that is what both Stuart and Jeremy are talking about, is how do you have those conversations, even if it's not around mental illness, or that you're, has to be really extreme. It's just those well-beings, those feelings that something's not quite right. We all have daily stresses in our lives, but there's something a little bit different to this, or someone's not able to come out of it. Usually they have a bad day and then they, the next day they're feeling a bit better about it. But, if they start to see patterns, but then also, I think the friends and family is a really critical, bit in recognition. How do you, in a way, we've seen mental health, dare I say it, mainstreamed. Sports stars have come out and said, I've been in my career and I've had depression all this time, and nobody ever knew. I think there's also benefit to the way Jeremy's described the work of Holt. How do you have industry leaders also talk about, actually, I'm experiencing my own challenges, and so it's about sort of saying, oh, actually, I'm not alone here. I'm not the only one that has these feelings. Actually, when I sit around the lunchroom, it's pretty common, if that's the way, the way Jeremy framed it. So I think that really critical to reducing stigma and normalizing it is to not say, this is around being, weak or mentally unwell. It's just about, I guess, various levels that, you're struggling, and that's okay. But there are ways, and there's probably a lot of evidence to support, early and brief interventions before letting it get to that point where you actually require long-term sort of intensive therapy. So call it out early.
And I probably build on that, Brad, by saying that it's what are you not only calling out early, but what are you doing proactively? And it seems as a society, at least in this country, we've lost a lot of our spiritual outlets, be it church or whatever that might be. And so what is our bigger connection? I'm not necessarily saying to God, but, is it about being a surfer, or is it about being a part of a community group? If I'm proactively reaching into those sort of environments, then I'm less likely to find myself into some of these more challenged spaces.
Absolutely. It's also about having courage to have these conversations amongst your peers, because once you have these conversations, that's when it becomes more acceptable to each other that you can go seek help. So it's important for everyone to build on conversation. So now we've got question number 4. What has arisen as recommendations with regard to mental health in the construction industry as a result of COVID-19?
Can I ask a dumb question? Could you repeat that question?
Sure. So what has arisen as recommendations with regards to mental health in the construction industry as a result of COVID-19? So since the pandemic has laid upon us, what has arisen as recommendations?
What we're seeing with our clients is a lot of the things we are talking about in these conversations. I think it's actually been a huge benefit, and not just construction sector, but across all sectors, in terms of this willingness to be human. And I think we are seeing this with our construction clients as well. Those conversations that we're all talking about, they're more happening now as a result of COVID, I'm sure, than they were beforehand. So it seems like this sense of permission has been given, particularly given this ongoing situation in Melbourne, but also has been in Sydney in particular, that's much more open. So in a way, that's been one of the gifts of COVID, if there is such a thing.
Further to that, Lucia, I think it's a really good question around, the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system has called out a whole range of system workforce challenges that were in place before COVID. I mean, they're legacy pieces, aren't they? But what the pandemic has done is really brought them to the front of the conversation, as Stuart has indicated. I think what we're seeing, particularly with the increasing demand, and I think this will be a conversation that's now with us for a number of years. I think this notion of post-pandemic and the impact that lockdowns and restrictions and have had on people's mental health and well-being will be seen for quite some time. And I'm sure I'm speaking to people in the mental health industry that are seeing that. We know workforce is a particular challenge. So, there's a range of announcements currently being made for mental health and wellbeing hubs and the like across Victoria. But it's about having a workforce that's also able to staff that, I think, is a significant work and, a piece that we need to consider, both at, a range of ends, that early intervention community space, but also at the tertiary end, so in hospitals and the like, and how people are presenting it, things like, continue to present at emergency departments and what sort of response there is. But I think just another thing I wanted to call out, which again, I'd be really think is critical to probably people on this call, is the well-being of the mental health clinicians and staff themselves. So we're hearing a lot about you've got people who are also in lockdown, also homeschooling, and they're in their lounge rooms or their home office counselling, for lack of a better word, people who are, homeschooling and, job insecurity or whatever it is. So again, it's, people putting themselves first. And I'm hearing lots of anecdotal stories about people having to reduce their client loads, or they're already booked out their waiting lists until the end of the year. And so again, that impacts on, what we've been, I think, trying to say around, you're encouraging people to access services, but are those services there? Do they understand what your needs are? Are they culturally safe? And are they accessible just in regards to the volume? So I think, although it's not a recommendation, it's certainly something around access that we're seeing now, increased demand, but the service sort of system response needs to be aligned to that, doesn't it? And so I think it's a real challenge, and we'll see that for some time yet.
And just
I
adding,
totally
sorry.
agree.
Just adding to that access very quickly is that we've found with Holt is that during this COVID pandemic for the last 18 months, it's almost driven, pushed, encouraged businesses to actually start developing a mental health strategy and policy and think more about it, because a lot of the factories, hardware stores, whatever it is, across our regions and across Australia have suddenly realised this is hit and they haven't got the mental health support, understanding, policies, procedures and connections that they potentially should have. So at least the positive is they'll have this moving forward, and some of them are talking about the functionality of telehealth, is that, you know, people can be in a room or an office and, you know, not traveling long distances, but they can actually just engage with telehealth with someone. Yes, some people like face-to-face, I'm like that, but at least there's an option, there's more options out there around telehealth and accessing support. But the good thing is businesses and that are starting to put more rigor and building foundations for mental health policies, which I value very much.
Thank you, everyone. Now the next question 5 is, how are some ways we can bring up mental health with co-workers whose behaviour has changed?
I'd make some comments here. I think, as we've all mentioned, it is a potentially awkward conversation. So it does raise the first question: how well do you know this person? Do they report to you? Are they a friend? What is the nature of that relationship? That's the first point. So the second point is how powerful it is to be having that conversation, walking side by side rather than across a table. So to actually make it a more human conversation and less confrontational on that basis. I think the third point I'd make is that sense of empathy that is so fundamental to giving you permission to be holding that conversation with this challenged person. And so I think part of that is, if you are able to disclose some of your own challenges around mental health, to show some level of acceptance of this is okay, and provide, if you like, 2 ears and 1 mouth of ratio of listening to where they're up to. That'd be some of the points that I'd make there.
That's an amazing point of view. I agree as well, because a conversation is a two-way thing, and not just focusing on, you know, things that you see that is wrong with them, but also sharing your own thoughts. So that is very important. Sorry, Jeremy, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just, yes, thank you. I was agreeing with Stuart about that empathy and compassion and understanding, and also not non-judgmental. It's so easy, seriously, to judge. It's it's hard to not judge. I know, as a tradie, to get that out of your system, to not judge and go, oh, really? I've heard this again, or pass judgment on them and all that sort of stuff. It's hard enough when someone has shame with expression of being vulnerable. So to further on to what Stuart said, to adding on to that, for me, when I have a mate talk to me, I want them to tell me what they've noticed. So for me, it's about going, you know, saying to someone, hey, mate, I love you and I care and I'm worried because you haven't been turning up to work. You know, you've been taking some risks. I know you've had a relationship breakdown. So just paying that respect by actually telling them what you've noticed. And they're like, oh, really? Okay. And then also knowing some of those support services and having the tough conversation, like Stuart said, and it could be once, twice. It doesn't matter how many times you have to have it, because they're potentially life-saving conversations. I can't emphasize that enough. So paying them respect by telling them what you've noticed, not judging, and having no shame, and creating the right environment is what I think needs to happen as well. It helps.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for everyone's input into this, as it's such an important conversation and can go on and talk about all these issues at hand. So we're going to wrap up with our last question. What can be done if the person doesn't want to talk about mental health?
It's a great question, isn't it? I'm sure it's something we think about in our personal, right across the spectrum, isn't it? I guess as Stuart and Jeremy, be there. Ensure that you're communicating, that it's not a, even if you are an employer, that you're not looking to have the conversation because it's a punitive approach, that there'll be a penalty if you were to disclose. So I guess that if you can, find a way to have, through that empathy and through acknowledging, maybe, starting off the conversation, oh, I've been feeling a particular way, and how are you going with that? Maybe, is just to continue to be there, reinforce. And again, someone may not respond immediately as your script, that you had in your head, if you'd done some sort of thinking about how this was going to play out, or, however you might have envisaged this was going to go, not to lose, hope of why you're offering support to someone. So, ask, and if someone says, no, I'm fine, great. If you never find, I'm here for you, and just be there for people. I think consistency, I think, is important. Be truthful, be honest. And I think that notion of, are you okay? And just not targeting people individually, that, I think you're okay, but I think you're not, because you're causing me problems and I'm losing money because of it, or whatever. I think just being there for people and showing that, I think over time, that'll be fruitful.
I think also it's possible that maybe you're not the right person for them to speak to, but there's possibly there's somebody that is. And so helping them to identify who would be somebody they'd be happy to have a chat to could be the best contribution that you can make, given the nature of the relationship or the situation. So in a way, it's not about whether they speak to you or not. It's about, do they get to speak to somebody who can give them that perspective.
Yeah, and sorry, finally, and to those 2 points, is that it can be confronting. When someone talks to you and opens up and asks you these questions, it can be confronting. So it might just be an initial, whoa, hey, I'm still trying to take that on board, and it's confronting, and trust and everything. So going back a second time is giving that person a little bit of time to process what you've talked about and what you've spoken about. If they push back, and then going back and asking them again. Don't be afraid to ask again. It just might be confronting for the person that first time, and pretty full on.
Absolutely. It's all about opening up to that conversation and being friendly. So thank you to all our wonderful panelists for the insightful discussion. Really enjoyed it myself. So before we conclude for today, we'd like to play a short video about Walk for Mental Health on the 17th of October.
Australia, are you ready for a challenge, and that too for a good cause? Then look no further. Join the MHFA as we walk for mental health across the country on the 17th of October at 10:30 a.m. in each state and territory capital. Worried about COVID? Well, we've got you covered. We have launched our MHFA app where you can walk virtually, raising funds as an individual or in a team. Visit our website for more information about getting started. So come on, Australia, our journey to better mental health starts with one step.
So amazing. So on behalf of Mental Health Foundation Australia, I would like to thank all of our speakers for participating in today's event. I would also like to thank our sponsors, Australian Unity, Chemist Own and Food Solutions, and you, our guests, for your support and participation. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.